Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Lisa Papademetriou join us. Lisa is the founder of Bookflow, an app that helps writers stay motivated and organized. She's a former editor and the author of over 20 novels, the last two of which were written on Bookflow. So thank you, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephan. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So first of all, I'd love to hear what got you into writing, because this wasn't just a passing fad. You wrote over 20 novels, so clearly this is something that speaks to you and speaks through you. So how did you end up getting into writing, and why continue?
Well, I do believe that all of us have that creative spark in us for something. And for me, writing was the thing early on. Actually, even more than writing, it was storytelling. When I was young, I would actually not write stories. I would sit in my room and draw maps of imaginary countries and kind of fill them with the sort of fantasy type of people that live in fantasy stories. Those books that you have a map in the front of. So that was where I got my imaginative start. But the funny thing about telling grown-ups when you're a kid that you want to be a writer is that they almost always try to talk you out of it. They say it's not practical, you'll never make any money. And so I decided that I would go into the editing side. I would go into the publishing side. And I did that for several years. And what I learned as an editor is that these authors that we put on pedestals and assume that they just write these beautiful novels, as they sit alone in their garret or whatever, are actually engaged in a creative process that can be really messy. And that they, even people who are experts and masters of the craft, that they don't always see their way into their own story. And that's the role of the editor, is to help someone bring that story forward and to help formalize their thinking. So when I got my first book contract, I had actually already been writing as a freelancer for a long time. And I decided I wanted to write my first novel from beginning to end. And I sold it based on a few sample chapters, because I sold it to someone who I had worked for before as a freelancer, and she knew that I could produce a novel. But the minute I had the contract, I panicked and I thought, what am I doing? I can't write an original novel. I don't know, I don't know how to do this with my name on it. And I called her up and I said, I don't know how to begin. And she said, Lisa, you are already an editor. You know how to take a messy manuscript that needs work and turn it into something publishable. So your first and only task right now is to write a messy manuscript. Just write something bad, and then you can go back and make it better. And it was so liberating to hear that. And of course, that is the first job of anyone who wants to write or do anything creative, or even get into business, or, just do anything where you are building something from scratch.
So how do you take a manuscript that you think is solid, like really good, and turn it into something that is of the quality that it deserves to be a New York Times bestseller? I'm actually at that point myself. I have a manuscript. It's my first self-help book. I have not secured a publisher yet. I would like to get Hay House or St. Martin's Press or New World. It's one of these more woo-woo type publishing houses to publish it. Its book is called Living in a Friendly Universe: A Skeptic's Guide to the Unseen World. And it's good. It's really good, but it is not of the caliber of a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I want it to be. I don't need the status. I would like the status of a New York Times bestseller, sure, but that's not what this is about. It's not an ego thing. It's like, I want to get this book into as many hands as possible and change lives with it. And in order to do that, the quality needs to be like just top notch, top tier. So yeah,
Absolutely.
what's the secret to that?
Well, of course, if we all knew the secret to what would make the perfect book or the ideal New York Times bestseller, there would be a lot more bestsellers. I guess that, by definition, there's only 10 books on that list at any given week, right? In any given genre. So part of that is going to be not just about the caliber of your writing, which of course is always important. And that's the piece that you actually have control over. But to a certain extent, it's also about making sure that you are speaking directly to the market that you think is going to be the most receptive to your book. And so it's about reaching the right people, not only as many people as possible, but as many of the right people who are going to receive your message. And so I would say that as you look over your writing, the thing to check on every page is, does it, as you imagine your ideal reader, does this speak to them in a way that they can hear? Because of course there's a million ways to write a wonderful book. And I personally am a huge fan of the kind of complex syntax and fluid prose of the Victorian writers, but I don't write that. And although I love to read it, I know that my readers are not looking for that either. So there's the excellent caliber, but there's also just the appropriate tone and content, and that is really more than anything what you need to focus on as you go through. I would say the other piece is that's really the simplest thing, the simplest piece of advice that I can give to any writer is to just look out for redundancies. Things that you're saying that you've said, before, in a similar way. Obviously, sometimes it takes more than one example to make a point, and so don't feel self-conscious about including different examples. But I know with nonfiction, there are some pieces of nonfiction that really feel like this is maybe a little repetitive, and tightening the prose. I don't think people mind having a short book. There's certain kinds of readers that will love a long book. Fantasy readers come to mind. But when it comes to nonfiction, I think that a short read can really be, if you can hold the reader's attention from beginning to end in a single sitting or in a couple of sittings, then you've really done your job.
Gotcha. And how does a tool like Bookflow figure into the equation to help you to eliminate redundancies, to uh, take that reader on the
Right.
journey so that they're following the story arc, the hero's journey with
Mhm.
you, and rooting for you along the way. They're not getting lost or bored. How does Bookflow or even similar tools, if there are any, do that for you?
So there are a few things that Bookflow does in a few different ways. It's really built out with the idea that it's for people who are engaged in creative writing, like novel writing or memoir building. But I do know people who use it for nonfiction or even poetry collections. What it does that is, I think, extremely helpful is that as you enter a project, there are three separate places for you to consider different elements of your project. A lot of people assume that writers just kind of jump into writing chapter one, scene one. It was a dark and stormy night. That is honestly, when I've taught writing, what my students expect themselves to be able to do. But I have discovered that there is actually no way to short circuit the process of really developing the background material. And this is what really applies to nonfiction as well. So for a novel, the ideal thing is to have an outline. And I think the same goes for nonfiction. And so one of the things that Bookflow does is that when you are in the project space, it does not force you to write an outline, but it encourages you to write an outline, so that it encourages you to write a brief description of the scene that you will be creating. And that scene could also just be, a chapter or a section for nonfiction. And once you have developed that description of the scene, you are able to drag and drop it into a new order, and that scene description appears right next to the scene that you're writing. So it appears on a kind of Post-it note page where all of your scene descriptions are, and you can put them in a new order. But it's also tied to the actual writing that you're doing, so that if you move your Post-it note, you move the whole scene along with it. So that if you decide that you want to reflow a number of sections in your work, it's very, very easy to visualize and do quickly. And this actually came to my rescue recently. I just had a novel for young readers published this past month. And the editor had asked me to cut an entire subplot. So I went back into Bookflow and I pulled out all of the scenes that were in that subplot, and I dragged them all to the bottom of the project so that they were all out of my way. And then in the places that I knew that I would have to write a new scene, I just simply wrote the description of what the scene that I needed to write in the future would be. And I dropped that into place so that then I could very quickly see where I needed to go in and write the new scene and get the whole thing to flow. So that is a really helpful thing. The other thing that Bookflow offers, and this is where it's really built out for people who are working on creative writing, is that it describes what needs to happen in a scene. When I was teaching in a master's program, I discovered I had so many master's level students who were terrific writers, but they did not have a sense of what made a scene flow structurally. And so I have, so there are checklists on Bookflow to see, like, have I accomplished this? And can I read that against what I'm hoping to accomplish? There's also information on what makes a good story, what makes a compelling character. So there's a section to build out your characters with questions and information for doing that. And again, if you want to understand motivations, you need to understand your characters. And so that section is really helpful. Also for memoirists, that's very, very helpful for them to understand other people and why they made the choices that they did in their own work. And there's a section for building out your themes and marketing ideas. So all of that is contained in a single project. It also gives you plenty of data so that you can see right where you are. If you set a goal, how close you are to your goal. It gives you little rewards. If you, write a certain way into your goal, you'll get a little, like, good job, keep going, star. And there are creative writing exercises every single day on the tool. So, I mean, part of writing a story is not just sitting down and grinding it out, but you have to be engaged with new ideas on a regular basis and think beyond just your project. This is, a writing project is almost like a bird's nest. You are gathering pieces from many different places to weave them into something holistic. So that's what that tool does on a feature level.
Wow, that's so cool. How could anybody write a book with just Microsoft Word?
Honestly, I did it for many, many years of my career. And what ended up happening is that I had so many files of different bits and pieces and no good place to put them. And it was hard, So, and I think that, Bookflow is the intersection of creativity and productivity, and it is so easy to get carried away by a desire to be productive that we forget what a pleasure it is to be creative. And, the times where you are in that flow state and you are doing both and you're being both creative and productive are the most satisfying. You don't want to ever get into a state where you're only being creative but not productive, or only being productive and not
Yeah.
creative.
Did you name Bookflow after being in flow, like a flow state where you're in primarily alpha brainwave state instead of beta?
Absolutely. That was the idea. It's the fluidity of the words, and the idea that we should just be able to kind of be in that fluid state, and as much as we'll allow ourselves, is why I came up with that idea. I also love the idea of um, the stories that we tell being these boats that we release onto the ocean, and just in search of their, I guess they're like messages in a bottle, and in search of the reader who will receive that message and take something from it. So there were all kinds of water images, but also the Csikszentmihalyi flow energy
Yeah,
as well.
that's awesome. And do you have competitors to Bookflow? I'm thinking like maybe Scrivener might be a competitor, but I don't know the tool that
Absolutely,
much
yes.
well.
Scrivener, yeah, Scrivener is a terrific tool that a lot of people are crazy about. And I find that people who are crazy about Scrivener, they will not entertain the idea of switching. And that's great. But a lot of people find that Scrivener can be, it has tremendous functionality, but it can be a little bit challenging to use. And so, I think that, like, there are different tools that support different parts of the writing process, and for some people Scrivener is the perfect thing, and for some people, I think Bookflow is going to speak a little bit more to their state of mind. So yeah, there are definitely some competitors in the space. I also I feel like Scrivener is really terrific for people who have a definite project in mind, and I feel like Bookflow is great for people who have a definite project in mind, but also people who just want to try to write every day and want to have something like a creative writing prompt to use every single day, and something new to collect for their bird's nest.
And would you say that Bookflow has gamification that Scrivener doesn't have?
Yes. You know, honestly, I despise talking about Scrivener too much because I don't use the tool. I did try it several years ago, so I don't know what they've
Sure.
added. But I would say that I do know that we do have a certain level of gamification, which is every time you come in and write, even if you write a single word, you're going to get a reward, a gold star for the day, and you'll get a certain number of gold stars for the week. And that, as you write into your novel, as I said, you can set a goal, you can see how far along you are, and there are rewards depending on how far along you get. And we have tied those rewards to the length of certain famous novels. So, if you write if you write something like 39,720 words, you'll get a reward saying like, oh, terrific. That's the same length as the Old Man and the Sea. That is an incorrect example, by the way. I'd have to look up what they were, but that is the kind of reward that you get. So it's an unexpected reward. You don't really know when you'll write your way into another one of these, like the length of a famous novel, but it's a fun thing to get, and to just think about like all of these other um, writers who have come along throughout history and who we're constantly in dialogue with, even in the present day.
Yeah, that's fun. And if somebody is looking for a tool to kind of collect information, those little strands and things to build the bird's nest, I've heard good
Mhm.
things about another tool called Roam Research. I have not used it myself. Are you familiar with
Ooh.
that one?
I am not, but that sounds like the thing that could probably be used in concert with Bookflow really well. Because Bookflow is about giving people the opportunity to engage with their own thoughts, right? In a more structured way. And so research is you have to have input in order to have output. So, and right now in the world that we've got today, we have so many inputs that are frustrating or, kind of stimulate our negative, like anger response, and or fear response. And so I think that, if we can put our minds on constructing something positive, communicating something that's important to us, or even just building a piece of an imaginative world, imagining a scene, or doing research on, on whatever subject kind of delights our mind. These are really positive inputs that yield positive outputs, right? And we're not just responding to sort of the negative stimuli that we can find ourselves surrounded by. We're reacting to positive stimuli, and not only that, we are putting ourselves into the world to find that positive stimuli, and that's a way of reclaiming power and really putting it in our own mind. And then as we analyze it in our own minds, as we work with it on the page, we formalize our thinking. We analyze our own thoughts and say, like, what, actually, I'm going to delete this. I don't even agree with myself here. And our thoughts get stronger and stronger, and it actually, as you write, your memory becomes stronger and stronger, and your ability to imagine and think creatively outside of the box also becomes stronger and stronger.
Let's actually talk a little bit about the differences between imagination, inspiration, and intuition. I think they're very
Okay.
different, and I'd love
Oh,
to hear
that's
your take on that.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'd love to hear your take on it too. I mean, inspiration is to me kind of the least of those three goddesses you named, right? So because we cannot count on inspiration, I feel like inspiration often arrives when I have put aside the desire for her to arrive and simply gotten to work. And it is in the work that inspiration comes. And when the funny thing is that as I'm in the middle of a piece of writing of any kind, as I'm thinking about it, it's almost like the things around me will conspire to reveal new thoughts and ideas. And that's just because, of course, as something is on your mind, you see it reflected in the world around you. So it's hard to wait. It doesn't make sense to wait for inspiration, or inspiration waits for you, I suppose. So imagination is the thing that we are all born with, and we almost can't help imagining new ways of using things, new ways of doing things. What if we could do this? What if we could do that? I spent a day with a bunch of preschoolers recently, and I was going to ask them about how to be creative. And but the funny thing was, they didn't even know what I meant when I asked that. I wasn't expecting them to. But as I sat down to eat the snack with them, they were given some Cheerios, and the little kids started. One of them licked his finger, and the Cheerio stuck to it. And then he licked his thumb, and the Cheerio stuck to that. And then he started stacking them up, and they were just being creative. Then they all started doing it, right? They were just being creative with what the materials given to them, which were just a bunch of Cheerios. So that was a way to use imagination, and I suppose that overlaps with creativity, which is what you were talking about. Those two things are kind of interlinked, because you cannot exercise your imagination without being creative. But I also believe that, creativity is really about the medium you choose to build whatever it is that you sort of think up in your mind. And so there's so many ways to be creative. There are visual arts, there's blogs, there's just even human interactions with other people. There's parenting. There's, you can have like just a creative conversation. But I do feel like we live in a world that's always pushing toward creation from the moment of the Big Bang to now, where we're all engaged in a project of creative existence. And so you can either, spend your time exercising that energy, or you can not exercise it. And I think that often leads people to kind of feeling a little stuck and frustrated. It's better to just take the time to build something that you're interested in, and even if it's only for you alone, it's going to pay off in an increase in energy and creative thinking in other aspects of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And part of our job here on this planet, I think, is to create. So if you're
Right.
either you're growing or you're dying, that's what Tony Robbins says, something along those lines. And I agree. If you're sitting on the couch just passively consuming maybe the latest Netflix series or whatever, you're not creating. You're just sucking the life out of everybody else and sucking the energy out of the room. So look for ways to create. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that you can even probably watch Netflix with an eye toward being creative. Because of course those things are all stories in and of themselves. So there's a way to watch it that's completely passive and that is ultimately not going to do anything for you. But is definitely a way to engage with that visual medium and to write about what you think. I've just been watching Dope Sick on Hulu, which was such a fascinating portrayal of the opioid crisis. A lot of things that I hadn't known about the opioid crisis, I became aware of through that, even though a lot of it is fictionalized. And I thought a lot about the performances that I saw and the different kinds of people who were affected, and the way that people have been affected by all kinds of drug crises in the United States. And these were all, it was like, there is a way to be engaged in this. And then I've had so many fascinating conversations with people about that short series, because I feel like, well, I was watching it and it engaged me and it really activated my mind. And so that actually did do something for me, so that I think that you can kind of do it one way or do it another way.
That is such a great point. It comes down to intention. If your intention is to veg out, then you're not in a creative state. You're in a consuming state. And
right. I mean, and at that point, it doesn't even matter what you consume. You can read the instructions on your shampoo bottle, and you'll get nothing out of it, and it will give nothing to you.
Yeah. And I remember one of my coaches, mentors, is Tina Zion. She was a guest on this podcast. She's a famous medical intuitive and Reiki master. And she was watching a show that was actually ended up being pretty dark, and she turned it off at one point where she's like, yeah, this isn't this isn't very good for me. But there was one line that just jumped out at her. I think there were like demons or some sort of entities in the show, and one of the protagonists proclaimed, yelled at one of these entities, "I have no more fear to feed you," and that just leapt off of the screen to her when like, there's the message. That's why I wasted all that time watching this stupid show, was for that, so that I can tell my clients that line. It's so important. and it's made a difference for the people that she's shared it with. And there's so many occurrences of that happening if you're open and receptive to receiving messages like that. There's a term actually I learned recently called shufflemancy, which is similar to bibliomancy. Bibliomancy being you open up a book with intention, and right at the spot you opened it is exactly the message you needed to read. So that's not random. That really works. And so
Right.
does shufflemancy, which is a cousin to that, where you're hopping onto your computer, maybe visiting the homepage of YouTube, or you're on some video page on YouTube, but you see the suggested videos over on the right hand side, or you're
Mm-hmm.
scrolling through your Facebook or your Twitter feed, and there it is, exactly the thing that you needed to see or to watch or read is right there in front of you, and it's not because of an algorithm. The surface level, yes, it's
Right.
because of an algorithm, but the algorithms and like our
Right.
whole experience of life, this whole simulation, is controlled by the angels and by God. So if you're receptive to that, then more of this can happen, more of this shufflemancy, and you can be receiving it during a Netflix binge. So I got some great good examples
Absolutely.
I'll share with you in a minute. I'm curious what your take is on what I just said.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have so many thoughts. Well, I think that that makes perfect sense. And um, it of course, kind of agrees with or reinforces some of these ancient traditions of like tarot cards or of astrology, where it is really kind of guided intuition. And so Carl Jung talks about how we are how archetypes are really they're stored in the collective unconscious, and these are ways that people for millennia have been in touch with their own with different aspects of their own selves. So you think about these sort of this demon archetype of the shadow, the dark side, and yeah, that is fed by fear, and it lives in all of us. We all can identify with how our fears make those demons grow more powerful and not necessarily in a literal way, but in figuratively, it's very true. And so these are the tools that exist in the wisdom traditions, and have existed for a really long time. So it's not surprising for me to think that people would be using technology to kind of do that just in the way one would do it in 2022. Like what they're these traditions continue and they evolve. And so yeah, I'm really intrigued by that whole idea. It makes me want to go to YouTube and try some shufflemancy and
No,
see what I
totally.
come up with.
And it just occurred to me that you could bake this into Bookflow.
I actually, that is so interesting that you would say that because I could, and I do feel that our daily writing exercise is a piece of that. People have often written to me to say, this is exactly what I needed to hear today, because it's often a quote, or it's an imaginative scenario, or it's just a visual image. But I also think that I'm also going to be teaching a workshop on archetypes for Whale Rock workshops, just coming up in the next one, and so it's almost amazing that you brought this up in this conversation, which I wasn't even planning on talking about archetypes at all. But just thinking about how these different energies kind of play out, and how we receive them as we read, or how we employ them as we write, can be really, really useful, intentional exercise. So
And
we had a little
that's
shufflemancy right
amazing.
here.
Yep. And you mentioned Carl Jung and archetypes.
Yeah.
Well, I just learned last year that I was what's the thing on Reddit? I was today years old when I learned this,
Yes.
that synchronicity was actually coined by Carl Jung, and he's the one who did all the research on it and created a whole book about it. Yeah,
Oh my goodness. I actually didn't even know that. So that's
yeah, yeah,
fascinating. Wow. All right. I'll have to look
yeah.
into that
Really,
some
really
more.
cool.
So, but that's really, I, as I was researching um, my MFA, I was writing about concepts of fate and how basically most of the project in traditional Western literature, um, is an attempt to understand our own role in terms of fate. And in the Western idea, it's based on the concept of word, WYRD, and that has an element of self becoming, like who am I becoming as I make choices toward my own fate. And so there is an element of self efficacy there. But, as I was looking into that, I learned that the word weird is based on that
Yeah.
word, and that it was first employed by Shakespeare in Macbeth, which I did not know. So in the Weird Sisters, who are sort of the embodiment of the past, present, and future, the three sisters, the fates, as it
Wow.
were.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
what are
Yeah.
the three, like, for somebody who's listening, not familiar with those sisters? Could you elaborate a bit?
Hmm. Well, you might remember bubble, bubble,
Yeah.
toil and trouble called, so the introduction. So the three sisters are supposed to be kind of based on the ancient Greek Morai, who were the sisters who were the fates, representing past, present, and future. And they, in the Greek tradition, they were weavers, and one would spin the thread of life, and one would weave it, and one would cut it. And so in Macbeth, they they meet Macbeth just as he's becoming Thane of Cawdor, I believe. It's the very beginning of the story, and so the tension in Macbeth is really all about, um, was this foretold by them, and he's merely living out the fate set by them, or did the fact that they gave him the prediction of his future make him start to enact it? So he already was someone who was ambitious, but not that ambitious. And he was already brave. He was already a warrior. But as the story progresses, he becomes more and more um, of his own darkest self as he makes choices that kind of reinforce the predictions, because he knows what the predictions are. So, and in fact, he even says, like, maybe I don't need to make this choice. Maybe it'll just happen. But ultimately, he does start making these choices. So that's really what the story
Mm.
is all about. Who has control of our fate? Do the fates have control of fate? Do we have control of our fate? And I think the answer is really, um, yes. Exterior circumstances happen, and we react, and also we make choices, and then exterior circumstances happen. So we're always in dialogue with our own process of becoming the self that we build brick by brick. And for Macbeth, it's a tragedy, but for other people, they start off flawed and they end up becoming much, much better. So, these are the
Yeah, yeah.
choices that
I
we
feel
make.
the latter is what's happening with me.
Well, that's what we hope for, right? That's right. Just as you were saying earlier in the podcast, like, You can be getting better or you can be getting worse. And so again, like sometimes it's hard to make these sort of life supporting choices. I don't always feel like writing every day, but let me tell you that when I take several days and I'm not writing, I'm not a happy person. I need to be doing that creative work to be
Yeah.
in my best place. Yeah. And I think most people feel that way about
Mm.
whatever it is
Yeah.
that
You know
feeds them.
what's happening for me that I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. I'm noticing that a lot of uh, my day, even though it feels like I'm making choices, it also, I have this awareness that it's already written. Mektub, if you're familiar with the book The
Mm-hmm.
Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. It's been a long time since
Yeah.
I've read
So
it,
in
but
that book,
yes. Yeah.
Maktub is Arabic for "it is written," and it's in the Quran, and it's
Mm-hmm.
actually a very profound and important concept for us to understand. If everything is written, including the fact that I'm bringing up The Alchemist right now, and that we're talking about the fates and all this sort of stuff, like it's all written, including, like, for example, I'll just glance at the clock at exactly the moment that shows me it's 11:11, and that I know is a sign that that's a message for me, that that's an angel number,
Right.
and it wasn't meant for me to notice it at 11:12 or 11:10, but 11:11. And I'll glance at
Mm-hmm.
something like a street sign, or like these things that just seem so, or seemed in the past to be so random. I get the sense of that this is already written. I was supposed to catch a glimpse of that one thing in the corner of my eye. And I don't know. For example, the other day, I said a prayer for this stray cat that I had saved in Israel a little over a year ago now. And I was sensing that she was in trouble. I haven't talked to she ended up in a nice home, thankfully. After I saved her, she had uh, a broken pelvis and dislocated foot, and I knew something was wrong. Like, I'd visit her every week when we went to this um, like energy healer, uh, network
Mm-hmm.
chiropractic, network spinal analysis, and it was amazing. And so every time we'd go and visit his offices while my wife was getting her entrainment, I would take my 2-year old and we would go and visit this one stray cat. And I brought food for it every week. And this one week, it was not well. There was something wrong with it. And because I had learned how to open my Akashic records just recently, that month, I opened my records. I asked what to do, and I was instructed to take it to the vet. And good thing, because she would not have made it. She was severely dehydrated and with a broken pelvis, and like couldn't really move. So that was beautiful and amazing. And when I connected with her
Yeah. Fast.
the other day, I felt like she was on the precipice. Like, this is a year later now,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't been in contact with the lady that took her in for months and months. That's probably been at least 6 months, but I felt like she's skating on the edge of life and death. I just felt it. So I
Mm-hmm.
contacted the lady, and she said, yeah, she's had 3 epileptic seizures in the last week. And yeah, anyway, so here's where the synchronicity and like that thing of it's written comes in.
Yes.
I say these prayers to assist with this cat, and then I finish, and I just happen to look down. There's a book, actually, about, the irony gets even deeper, about intuition on the nightstand. And
Mm-hmm.
there, right next to that book, stuck to the nightstand, is a little sticker of a cat, a little tiny sticker of a cat. One of my son's stickers. He has lots of stickers, but it's a cat. And I had not remembered that on that nightstand there was this little cat uh, sticker until that moment, which was right after I said the prayer. So I was like, oh, okay, this made a difference. I knew that that was like a
Wow,
confirmation
that's
for me.
right. It's interesting. And again, it's like our mind is, our intuition is guided by what's happening, but it's also just so interesting to me to think about the language of it is written because of course, again, for me, writing and language is how we
Mm-hmm.
create ourselves. It is how we come to understand ourselves in the world and our own thoughts and how we're in dialogue with the past. And that's really why I feel like everyone should write, whether they have the ambition to be a writer or not. It's just really about formalizing your thinking. And so I'm always interested when, there's something like in the beginning there was the word, and it's like how much of of the world do we create through language? How much of language creates the world? I mean, it's really interesting that it's even
Yeah.
phrased that way. And I do wonder too about how much of it is written is I always wonder if it's written a bit like a choose your own adventure is written, right? Like it is written, of course, but there are there are many ways the ending could
Yes,
go, I
that actually
suppose.
brings me
Yeah.
back to even before we started recording, we had a little bit of a conversation, and I dropped into the chat
Mhm.
to you a link to an article Tom Kenyon wrote about timelines. And this is where my
Mhm.
Kabbalah training ties in. Because in Kabbalah, I learned that essentially everything is written, right? And that free will only exists in the moments
Mhm.
in between. Essentially, when you decide to
Right.
be extra proactive versus your kind of robotic consciousness,
Right.
you're
That's
being
interesting.
an autopilot, like how you normally go out about your day. Even if
Mhm.
how you normally go about your day is to be kind to homeless people and give them money and so forth, that's already written. But when you go the extra mile outside of your comfort zone, that's
Right.
where you can get an upgrade to a whole new timeline. And conversely, you get a
That's an
downgrade to an
interesting.
even worse timeline, and where everything else is written if you're malevolent or just really reactive.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting how so many different traditions have different ways of kind of looking at almost, you know, just the reality that we all inhabit, in which it's possible to just go through your life kind of responding to stimuli, but it's also, and part of the main um creative work that we do, just being within this world, is staying conscious in the moment, being aware of our own thoughts, being aware of what it is that we're putting into the world, and trying to do it as positively
Mm-hmm.
as we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. By the way, I'll include the link that I shared with you from Tom Kenyon's site about jumping timelines. I'll include that in the show notes for this episode. Uh, Now, I want to circle. Yeah,
Be interested
it's
to
really
read.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's circle back to this idea of Netflix binging, because I wanted to share a couple of examples that were just really pretty notable. One was I was watching the movie Kardec with my wife Orion, and
Mm.
the movie Kardec is about Alan Kardec, who was the founder of Spiritism back in the 1800s. It's a
Okay.
fascinating movie, really, really good. Anyways, there was a point where we stopped the movie to, I don't know, check on our son or something, right? And we had a conversation. It was really deep. I don't remember the context of it, but all I remember was the moment we hit the play button, there was a message. It was exactly and we wouldn't have known it because it was right after where we paused it. But what we heard right after when we hit play again after having this whole conversation, it was a really deep conversation, and it was exactly the thing that tied in perfectly with what we were talking about, and it was so spooky, amazing. And so that's another example of of
That's
the
fascinating.
shufflemancy, right? Within a movie.
Right. Well, exactly. And just creative engagement, like you were engaged with what the project was trying to say to you, and you were having, you were in conversation with the work of art,
Mm-hmm.
and it spoke
Oh,
back.
that's another thing
Right.
too.
So
This
that's
is
really interesting.
fascinating, and I'm so
Yep.
excited to know this. That like, so I learned how to open my Akashic records and do Akashic records readings from Anne Marie Pizarro and from Christine. Oh shoot, what's her name? Um, 1 second. I'm gonna Christina Cross. Yeah, so I learned from both Christina Cross and Anne Marie Pizarro how to open my Akashic records and do readings and stuff for others too, but especially for myself because that's really helpful. But you can also open up the records of a work of art, a creative work, like a book,
That's interesting.
like the book I'm
Mhm.
writing.
Yeah.
I can talk to the guides and Akashic records keepers for that work and find out
Mhm.
what the plan is and what the best kind of most benevolent outcome would be and how best to support that work in the world so that it makes the maximum amount of impact. Isn't that cool?
Interesting. I've never heard of this before, so I'll be really interested to
Yeah,
like
yeah. Are you
find out
familiar
more
with
about it.
the term Akashic
Fascinated.
records? Ah,
I'm not, but
well,
so I'm
there's
going
an
to Google it.
episode there.
That's the beauty of
Yeah, of course,
2022.
everything's on Google. But in this show, there was an
Yeah.
episode in December 2020. Anne Marie Pizarro, who's an amazing Akashic Records reader.
Mhm.
That episode is all about Akashic
Mhm.
Records. And just in short, the idea is that every thought, word, and deed across all lifetimes is recorded. And where is it recorded? In the Akasha. The Akash Sanskrit word
Mm.
means primal substance. And so we have
Mm.
a
Mhm.
record of everything that we've ever done, ever
Mhm.
thought across all lifetimes that's at our disposal that we have access to, that we can open our Akashic records with assistance from our guides and angels and so forth and ask them for guidance,
Mhm.
ask them for information. Now, we're not going to get the answer to when you're going to die.
Mhm.
That's not like you're not going to,
Right.
you're not allowed that.
What will I get for Christmas? Right. It's
Yeah.
not
I mean,
that
you
kind of
can
thing. Right.
actually get what
Yeah.
you're going to get for Christmas. But when you're going to die is not an allowed question. I mean, you can ask it, but you're not going to get an answer to it because uh, that changes the whole video game for you, the game of life. And it's not
Right.
fun if you already know the script of your movie.
Oh
So,
dear.
anyways, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on um, like, does everyone have a book in them?
Oh, absolutely. Now, does everyone need to publish that book? No. Um, everybody has stories to tell. Everyone has imagination to engage with. Everyone has thoughts to process. And I think that all of that is enough to fill several books for every single one of us. Um, but if your ambition is to write a book, I would say that then you should, and because you will only gain by that. Um, uh, Even if you never find a publisher, the opportunities now for self-publishing are tremendous. And sometimes people just want to write something to share with their family or with a very specific small audience, and it's always worth doing because you do not come out of that process the same person who went into the process. You come out of that process someone who has learned a great deal and processed a great deal, and um, just concentrated on trying to convey thoughts. And so It is
Yeah.
never
And
going to
do you
harm
know
you.
anybody who's channeled books? So they're basically taking dictation from above.
I have actually felt that way. And I know that a lot of the ancient writers felt that way. And in fact, that's what the ancient writers all believed was happening. Your job was to open yourself for the muse so that the muse could work through you, or the gods could work through you. No, the sort of ancient Greeks did not believe that they were geniuses. They believed that they had geniuses and that the genius would work through them from an external source. So their job was to be available, and that's why so many of these ancient epics begin with an invocation of the muse, like, "Oh, muse, please, please bless me with your story." And but I don't think that sort of taking that kind of dictation feels very different from the state of flow that we were talking about earlier. And so these might be just different words for the very same thing, where you're so engaged in the task that it feels as if it is coming
Mm,
from
yeah.
beyond you.
And
You know,
I recently learned this, that The Alchemist was written in 12 days. Yeah.
wow,
So
isn't that
clearly that was
amazing?
channeled. That he just tapped into
That was
the fabric of space time and pulled that out, and amazing. And
right,
how many millions, tens or hundreds of millions of copies of that book have been sold? It's yeah.
right,
I loved that
right.
book. I just finally
Yes, yeah.
listened to it, the audiobook. It's narrated by Jeremy Irons, the actor. It's really good. Yeah, really,
Oh
really good.
wow, oh,
Yeah,
that sounds like a great
awesome.
listen.
So, what would be
Yeah.
your last kind of nugget of wisdom to share with our listener or viewer in terms of taking their life to the next level, whether they want to journal or write a memoir or a nonfiction book or just sit on the couch? Like, what would be the last nugget for them?
I suppose the last nugget is to be aware of your inputs, right? So if you are journaling, I always found journaling difficult because it feels like an expectation that you'll have something to say every single day. And for a long time, I went about this by just writing down what I had done that day. But that was never very interesting for me. Or sometimes I would just complain about thoughts in my mind. Lately, I have been writing about things that I'm reading or things that I have seen on Netflix or whatever, and that always gives me some material to work with and to kind of draw thoughts from. So whether your project is to write something, or whether you're scratching around for a new project or whatever it is that you're doing, just start paying attention to what it is that you are putting into your mind. I feel like there's so many possible distractions now, that it's very easy to fill up your time with thoughts and fears that will don't give you anything substantive to really work with in a positive way. So that's it. Watch your inputs and try to consciously be creative every single day, even if it's just being creative within the
Yeah,
context of your relationships. Just make sure that you connect with people, and appreciate mindfully
yeah,
what's actually going on in the world
great advice.
around you.
And I believe you have some. I don't know if they're study groups or what you call them, but in Bookflow, I actually attended one or two of these meetups on Zoom, and it was kind of like a book
Hmm.
discussion sort of thing. In fact, I was just looking up this
Yeah.
on Notion, and we talked about flow at the beginning, and Mihaly
Hmm.
Csikszentmihalyi, is that how you pronounce it?
I've been told that it's actually
Csikszentmihalyi, yeah,
pronounced
that sounds right.
Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah. So even though there's lots of other letters in there that I want to pronounce, I
Yeah,
think
yeah. So
that's actually
that
how it's
book
pronounced.
by Mihaly is one of the
Mhm.
books you guys discussed, or you had a
Yeah, we did, and we have been. I actually had, and we are actually on hiatus right now, but we have had a book club for books on creativity, books on writing, and books on productivity. All the three pieces of the clover. So yeah, and that has been just a wonderful thing because everybody gains some sort of insight from every single
That's
title
cool.
that we
And is
read.
that just for people who are part
Yeah.
of the Bookflow platform?
It has been, yes. As I started up again, I think it's we're on hiatus for a couple of months, but we also have a Facebook page. So if you join the Bookflow Facebook page, that's really
Gotcha.
what it's
Okay.
through.
Well,
So
hopefully
yeah,
our
so
listener is
anyone
going
can
to
join
sign
that.
up for Bookflow, not just for the study group, but for the tool, because the tool sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I've written two novels on it already, and
Yeah,
I'm
and
well
I
into
believe
the
you have
third. So
a coupon code or a discount for our listener.
yeah, we do. It is
Optimize
optimized
25. Awesome.
25.
And that's for 15% off the first year.
Yes,
Awesome. Well,
that's
thank you
right.
for that. And we'll include that in the show notes and all the great resources and suggestions and books and so forth. Those will go into the show notes as well. And thank you again, Lisa. This was a fabulous and inspiring conversation.
Thank you so much. It has really been a pleasure
Likewise,
to
and
chat with
listener,
you.
I hope you take some nugget, some wise advice from this episode and apply it in your life because this is a world of action, not a world of consumption. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.